And welcome to another episode of Unscripted and Unchained RPG Review. I am DM Bloodworth, and as you can see by the graphics, today's video is a return to my video series, AD&D First Edition, Why Is It Still So Playable? This is part 3, and I'm going to take the incredible task of trying to go through the Dungeon Master's Guide in just one episode. This might require me to do a follow-up later on. It most certainly will require during this session probably longer than normal. So I'm expecting a video that might take between 45 minutes to an hour, and it probably still won't cover everything that is in this book. One of the criticisms about this is that, and I will hold it up right here, about this Dungeon Master's Guide First Edition, is that it is extremely dense. There's some 250 plus charts and graphs that can be used, and its layout and format is not exactly user friendly, and in some cases that's probably accurate, because as I was flipping through and thinking about putting this video out, I was saying, well, I would have put these two sections together, and that way kind of create a chapter. That I was thinking mostly around when I came across the section on followers, and then later on hirelings and NPCs and such. I would have put all of that into one section. But other than that, there's not many other changes that I would have made, beyond the layout, because almost everything that Gary Gygax had put into this was something that he prefaced that it doesn't have to all go in, or he clearly identified the parts that should be in there or even must be in there in order to support the integrity of the game, but for the most part, you don't have to use every single thing that is in here. And I will go through some of those sections today. So, as I said, if I have to make a return to this to clarify some points or whatever, just leave comments in the comments section and say, hey, can you go back and cover this again? Or could you look at this in a little bit more detail? And I will certainly do that as a revisit after the whole series is done. So I know it's a monumental task to try to do this all in one session, especially doing a straight, unscripted walkthrough of this book as well. So just bear with me, and I hope to keep this as interesting and as concise as I possibly can. I am going to switch views and go to the PDF version of the book, which is identical to the one I'm currently using here. So, and let me just expand this here for my own view. Oh, I'm actually not in there. Here we go. So, excuse me. Dungeon Master's Guide, you can see it's 240 pages. And this is the same version that I have in front of me, even though this is not my PDF scan. So this was the third in the series of the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons First Edition. The first one was the Monster Manual, followed by the Player's Handbook, and now this in 1979. I will focus on a few parts of the foreword, which all of the forewords are written by Mike Carr, and then a portion of Gary Gygax's introduction, because I think that those are important as well. So again, just bear with me as I do some read aloud here and follow along. So my car actually introduced this as the Dungeon Master is an art or a science, an interesting question. And they pretty much come down on the idea that it is more so a science uh, than an art because there are certain features that have to uh, be done as well. So, if you consider the pure creative aspect of starting from scratch, the personal touch of individual flair that goes into preparation, and the running a unique campaign, or the particular style of modeling in a game adventure, then the dungeon mastering may indeed be thought of as an art. If you consider the aspect of experimentation, the painstaking effort of preparation and attention to detail, and the continuing search for new ideas and approaches, then dungeon mastering is perhaps more like a science. Not always exacting in a literal science, but exacting in terms of what is required to do the job well. Esoteric questions aside, one thing is certain: dungeon mastering is above all a labor of love. It is demanding, time consuming, and certainly not a task to be undertaken lightly. The sheer bulk of the book you hold in your hand will tell you that. But as all DMs know, the rewards are great. An endless challenge to an imagination and intellect, an enjoyable pastime to fill many hours with fantastic and often unpredictable happenings, and an opportunity to watch a story unfold, a grand idea or to grow and flourish. The imagination knows no bounds, and the possibilities of the game of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons are as just as limitless. Who can say what awaits each player except a cornucopia of fantasy and heroic adventure? So much is waiting indeed. So there is a reason, and I've seen this number floated around quite often. There's a reason that only about 20% of role playing players actually are game masters or dungeon masters. It is a select few, roughly 20%, that actually step into this role. And part of that has to do with the numerical dynamics of what a gaming table looks like. There is usually 4 to 5 players and a DM. That's how it usually breaks down. Sometimes there are larger groups, sometimes smaller, but for the most part, there's only one DM for a number of players, at the table. So it's selected by the expectation of your table numbers to begin with. Then there is all of the prep work and everything that goes into actually using this 240-page volume and crafting a gaming experience for the players at the table. And that's not something that people step into very easily or without trepidation. I know a lot of players express nervousness about GMing for their first time, and it's something that I encourage everybody to try. But let's move on. We will get to Gary Gygax's intro next. And so here we have the preface. Let me just make sure I have the right section here. Yes, so the preface. What follows herein is strictly for the eyes of you, the campaign referee. As the creator and ultimate authority in your respective game, this work is written as one dungeon master equal to another. Pronouncements there may be, but they are not from on high, as respects your game. Dictums are given for the sake of the game only. For if Advanced Dungeons and Dragons is to survive and grow, it must have some degree of uniformity, a familiarity of method and procedure from campaign to campaign within the whole. Advanced D&D is more than a framework around which individual DMs construct their respective milieu. It is above all a set of boundaries for all of the worlds devised by referees everywhere. These boundaries are broad and spacious, and there are numerous ideas where they are so vague and amorphous as to make them nearly non existent, but they are there nonetheless. So, Gary Gygax is basically talking about, and I'll switch views here for a moment. Gary Gygax is basically talking about how the dungeon master is a referee. The rules in this book are amorphous enough or flexible enough for them to remain creative within the rules, but that the rules are still there. And they're there to maintain the integrity of the game. And so, that's the main gist that I got from Gary's preface, is that this is still a guide, all right, but it's not something that should just be completely discarded in any way, because there are things in here that are purposeful and meant to be a foundation for you to springboard off of and create your own thing. So let's switch back and we go here. And I will move on from this because it's a long statement, and that's the general gist of this anyway, is that this book is here to really help you build everything around it. Then we go into the introduction. And so far every book that I've covered, in this follows that same format. So there's something by Matt Carr, there's something by there's a preface by Gary Gygax, and then we go into an introduction, which is basically an introduction to the book itself, or the series of books, as this seems to be doing here. And now we're going to start getting into some of those charts and graphs that everybody spoke about. So we get into the dice and explaining how the various dice work. So here you have your D4, your D6, your D8, your D12, and your D20. They don't have a D10 in there. That's interesting. But there you have your basic dice, and they go into the bell curve and the rolling of averages and such. Here we have the methods for creating characters. All right, and really rolling the character attributes. So I want to spend a little time with this because this is important. This is one of the earliest decisions that the GM is going to make, is what method of attribute rolling are the players going to be allowed to do. So we have method number 1. All scores are recorded and arranged in the order the player desires. You roll 4d6 and you drop the lowest score. All right. So that's the one that's very common. That's the one I'm most familiar with. Is to roll the 4d6, drop the lowest, and then you place them however you wish. Old school D&D was roll 3d6, place them in the order of the attributes listed on the chart, and that's it. So it was much, much more strict as far as where you got to place your attributes, and it oftentimes dictated what character class your character was going to be able to be, unless the DM allowed you to do another roll or another set. So this method 1, the 4d6 drop the lowest, is the one that I'm most familiar with. Method 2 is all scores are recorded and arranged as in method 1. All right, so by the player. 3d6 are rolled 12 times, and the highest 6 scores are retained. All right, so that basically means that you're rolling the 3d6 12 times, and then you're taking the best 6 rolls out of that, and you're putting those into the attributes that you wish. I think you're going to end up with a fairly powerful character that way, but it is something that I've seen on a number of occasions. So, and in other systems as well. So it's not that overpowered. Method 3, scores rolled are according to each ability category in strength, intelligence, wisdom, dexterity, constitution, charisma. 3d6 are rolled 6 times for each ability, and the highest score in each category is retained for that category. This, in my opinion, and I'm actually going to sit and work this out myself with a computerized dice roller. This is going to create very powerful attribute-wise characters. That average is going to jump way above the roughly 12 that that is normal, because you're rolling 3d6 6 times for each attribute. You're going to end up with a powerful character using method 3. I personally wouldn't use that as a DM, because I like the players to deal with a character that is not superhuman. Might have a few marginal or average roles in there, attributes in there, and maybe even some that are subpar, and have to deal with that as well. Method 4 is to roll 3d6, roll sufficient times to generate 6 ability scores in order for 12 characters. So here you're going to roll up the equivalent of 12 different character attribute sets, and then choose the one that you want to play. That's a whole lot of rolling to do, just to choose one character. And this isn't Dungeon Crawl Classics where you're creating 4 characters to run the funnel. This is, rolling up one character that you're looking to play, and then maybe one backup in case a character dies. But method 4, I would lean personally towards method 1, possibly method 2, probably not 3, and probably not 4. But anyway, that's just me. You might have your own preferences there. They go into non-player characters as well, where they could use the same system, or although general characters, so kind of minor NPCs might not even have this, or they might just roll 3d6 and then you just place it within their abilities and they do other things. I usually just consider a no-named NPC as somebody with 10s across the board. And that's kind of the average of a 3d6 roll. It's like 3.5, so 10 or 11, being the average of those 3 dice rolls. I would just go with 10 and make them, a common person has a 10 across the 6 attributes, sorry. The effective wishes on the character ability scores. I don't know, That's where they start getting into kind of the weeds and everything. Creating a character, player characters. They have the non-professional skills. So this is kind of a background. If you wanted to, start considering the background of your character, they go into character ages, and then disease, aging, disease, and death for characters. So non-human character tables for their average ages, and this is the age that they're starting their adventuring career at. So a dwarf would start, for example, at 250 years old as a cleric, plus 2d10, 2d20. I'm sorry. So that would be added for cleric. Now, if you remember back at this might be for NPCs or whatever, because if you look back at my video when I was going through the player's handbook, it said clerics weren't open to dwarves. So we have a little bit of a mismatch here in ideology. We always allowed every race. If they had a pantheon, they had clerics. So we never said, oh no, you can't be a cleric because you're a dwarf, based on the player's handbook. And there might have been an errata that corrected that. But since the DMG came out as book 3 in that, I would take the DMG's list, over the player handbooks in that case. Aging. I was thinking of mentioning this. The fact that they included age and life expectancy and even a variable tied to this as well is kind of the forethought that our characters might actually last a long time and be played throughout their lifetime, from very young when you first rolled them up and to possibly dying of old age. And so the projection is that there could very well be very long campaigns that span the entire lifetime of your character. And the fact that they have rules for this kind of thing means that there was an anticipation that it's something that they wanted to allow for, focus on, or at least acknowledge could happen. So I really like that. I like the fact that that detail is here. And then there are modifiers to attributes based on how old your character is, or how young, I should say, also. They go into disease charts here and the various types of diseases. So here's some of those 250 plus charts and graphs that you have here. But again, they're allowing for almost every possibility of generating a character and generating a real in-depth character sheet that could have all these details if you wish to include them. Here's that maximum age variation. See, now we go into followers. And like I said, I would have taken the followers section and combined it up with the henchmen section because they are kind of similar there, but they go into followers. I'm not going to spend too much time there. And these are the people that will fill up your player character's entourage as they become more powerful. They will start attracting followers, which you as a DM can have those followers actually, instead of just tagging along with the player characters, actually hanging back at their home or the town or village where they started their careers out in, and doing various tasks behind the scenes. Which some role-playing games in the computer role-playing gaming actually have that kind of element to it as well. So multi-class characters. just all kinds of possibilities covered here. They go into thieves and assassins as far as setting traps and poisons and the use of poison and such different types of poisons. They basically tried to cover everything that could possibly happen to your characters and included it in here. Lycanthropy, when you might change. So every possibility is entertained here. Alignments, not the hugest fan of alignments. Alignment language, which I think is ridiculous, just to not give it 100% praise, for these for this older edition. But I always found that alignment language is just unnecessary. Player characters' expenses. So now we get into maintenance of henchmen and strongholds and everything. That's all for later on. Starting money. You see, this is something I would have put earlier on in the in the book as far as going, because why would you talk about henchmen and followers and strongholds and the monies that costs, and then start talking about player character starting money, which is at the very beginning of their career. So just some ordering and sequencing type of things that I would have would have dealt with a little bit differently. Then again, this was somewhat of a trendsetter, so this was not, there weren't very many games out there to compare with as far as formatting and sequence of putting this kind of a volume together. So dexterity and armor bonuses, and they go into a little bit more detail. I love the section that was on sages and expert hirelings and such, and just the areas of their expertise really struck me as being interesting. Like, I just sat there and read through it, and I was like, wow. Every group, in my opinion, again, every group should have like a sage that they go to for advice and such, and to, actually create that kind of an NPC would be awesome to have. I think that chart is actually coming up here. So yeah, here it is. So the sage fields of study and special knowledge categories, and so you could be generating an NPC sage character that would be kind of like an assistant to your player characters group. And here are all the variations that they could find. So you could say, all right, I'm going to give this NPC like 3 areas of knowledge that they have and try to relate them. So they might have humankind and humanoid kind, both, the history of both, and then something else. They might be all 3 of these first categories, but just one particular field of like history, and history. And so if you wanted to find a sage that could tell you about the history of any of the peoples, demi-humans, or humanoids and giant kind out there, that would be your go-to person to go to. So I really liked that. Now we go into henchmen. And once again, I would have put followers in this area as well. Character spells, I am not going to spend any time here during this video going over character spells. They're in the player's handbook. They're also here. And just not going to spend that time. All right, so adventuring for land adventures. So now Gary starts talking about movement, and as you're talking about movement, like especially overland movement and the use of hexagons, so what to do when a party gets lost. You're talking about facing and directional use. They talk about movement over rough terrain and the effects that it has on movement over rough terrain. Talking about the chances of becoming lost. Um, and you start to understand or realize, once again, or be reminded once again that this is all coming from tabletop wargaming, is the idea of facing a movement and position and the impacts of terrain and everything. So you can definitely see that connection of including these rules in the role-playing game that certainly came from the the pre the pre-existing idea of wargaming, tabletop wargaming. Aerial travel, aerial combat, speed, maneuverability, and such, and then the various types of creatures and their aerial abilities and preferences, how they like to prefer, to conduct combat in the air or not so, even though they are a flying creature. Once again, a lot more of that connection to tabletop wargaming, waterborne adventures, and same kind of detail. Travel speeds, wind directions and force, weather effects, damage to the ships that you're traveling on, ships being captured, grappling and boarding, so all the combat that can take place with ships and such. Just a whole section on that. Underwater adventures and everything involved, including spell effects and how they're modified for underwater. So that's a good section on that as well. Now, I'm only up to page 60, all right, of 240. So you could see there is quite a ways to go. I'm only 1/4 of the way through this book, and I'm going really quite fast. You can see just how dense this is. And then we get into combat, encounters combat, and initiative. So this is the very basic rules that are going to be applied when you are playing Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. It's the most common rules that you're going to be dealing with. The most common combat that you're going to be involved with. So the first step is to determine if either or both sides are surprised. So this is the sequence or the order of combat. Determine the distance, if unknown, between the parties. If both parties are unsurprised or equally surprised, determine the initiative for the round. Determine the results of which actions are decided upon by the party with initiative. In voiding engagement, so if one of the sides tries to flee, slams the door, use magic to escape, etc., if possible. Attempt to parley, if they're going to try to talk their way out of this. Await action of the other party. All right, so once the initiative has been handled on the one side, then it shifts over to the other. Discharge missiles or magic devices, attacks, or cause spells or turn undead. Close to within striking range, which is a movement phase. Set the weapons against possible opponent charge. So that's another thing that takes place. Striking with your weapons. So now we're to the melee and then grappling or holding, determine the results of what occurred, and continue each melee round by determination of distance initiative. And so you can go back and restart over again, at least at the initiative phase. You don't have to roll for surprise again or do any of that determination at that point. And they break down each of those and talk about the encounter reactions. This is something that's often, I think, overlooked, at least in my experience, is that the reactions don't always have to be, I see somebody, I don't know who they are, let's attack. Or they see me and they're all of a sudden willing to just stand up and just respond to whatever we do, or react to whatever we do instead of them possibly doing something that's unintended, unexpected, from their part. It would be pretty interesting if a player character group approached a group of goblins and the goblins immediately surrender, or the goblins try to parlay with the character group, because they're going to ask the character group to, assist them in something. And it's just gives the opportunity for the DM to come up with some of these different scenarios that break from what is normal, and that could be based on just a reaction. And reactions don't have to be rolled; they could be decided by the DM. The DM could decide, listen, I want to change the tone up of this adventure a little bit, and so I'm not going to have them be immediately hostile or immediately, unfriendly. I might have them be uncertain or even friendly, just to break things up and make things a little bit more interesting. Combat morale. I personally only apply morale to NPCs and creatures, monsters, or whatever beasts that the players are combating. A player character's morale is whatever the player decides, unless some spell effect has done something else, caused them, but they're basically going to control their own morale. Let's see, we go into melee combat, and you can see the various front, flank, rear, and such, because that all has a game mechanic tied to whether you're being attacked face on or from the rear, and such. They go through an example of melee, non-lethal and weaponless combat. Now we get to the combat tables. These are, very very common to see, and I know a lot of systems. A lot of people talk about this one right here. To hit AC 0, all right, which is known as THAC0. And so if the opponent's armor class is 0, a first to second level cleric, druid, or monk needs a 20, an 18 for levels 4 through 6, a 16, so you can see it's a declining by 2 for each of these level brackets. Now, in older school D&D, it was every single level was a different point, or actually they were level ranges as well. What I was thinking of armor class. So if I know that I need a 20 to hit AC 0, to hit AC -1, I need a 20. Usually 20s are a natural hit, but at -6, it's a 21. Going the other direction, so it's a number line. I only need a 19 to hit armor class 1, an 18 to hit armor class 2, a 17 for 3. The average mob has about like a 7 AC, 7 or 8 or so, so a 13. 10 is the worst armor class you can have, and so a first level cleric would only need a 10 to hit you with an armor class of 10. Missile effects at long range get a -5, at medium range get a -2, at short or point blank they will receive no reduction into hit. Assassin's Table. So a lot of these are going to be on the Dungeon Master's screen. A lot of these charts and such. This is all section on psionics. There's quite a lot done for psionics in the game. Go into saving throws. So your various saving throws against the basic categories. So the basic categories of saving throws are poison saves, magic saving throws, and physical type saving throws. So death and system shock and those kinds of things as well. How to recover, hit points, 0 hit points. When any creature is brought to 0 hit points, optionally as low as -3 hit points if from the same blow which brought the total to 0. It is unconscious. In each of the next succeeding rounds, 1 additional negative point will be lost until -10 is reached and the creature dies. Such loss and death are caused with bleeding, shock, convulsions, non-respiration, and similar causes. Any character brought to 0 or fewer hit points and then revived will remain in a coma for 1 to 6 turns. Thereafter, he or she may rest for a full week minimum. He or she will be incapable of any activity other than that necessary to move slowly to a place of rest and eat and sleep, wherein the character cannot attack, defend, cast spells, use magic devices, carry burdens, run, study, research, or anything else. This is true even if cure spells and or healing potions are given to him or her. Although if a heal spell is bestowed, the prohibition no longer applies. All right, so you can do some of those other activities if a healing spell was done, but you still need the week's worth of rest. If any creature reaches a state of -6 or greater negative hit points before being revived, this could indicate scarring, or the loss of some member, if you choose to. All right, so if you choose to have them lose an arm or something like that, a hand, even a leg, or have severe scarring on the face or neck or whatever, that's where that comes in. In my current AD&D campaign that I'm playing in as a player, when you go into negatives, my DM has us roll a system shock to see that we don't die instantly. Gaining experience levels. So experience points in first edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, you get experience from combat. No matter how much you participated in the combat itself. So you'll get experience from anything killed during that combat. So if you're just a healer, you're still going to get the combat experience points. You get experience points from gold, on a 1-for-1. So every gold piece worth of loot that you gain or sell off, and any gold pieces 1-for-1 will come down as far as experience points. And it's usually distributed amongst all of the player characters and the that were involved in getting that cut of experience points, or the cut of loot from their actions. It gets a little dicey with magic items being being received or even sold off, because the gold value of those, that it becomes tremendous sometimes. So a lot of experience points given out in those cases. So I've seen a variety of methods of dealing with that by only giving 10%, which is what I did in my D&D campaign that I was running for quite a number of months. Was that because magic items had such high gold value, gold piece value, I only gave 10% of their value as experience points. So, social classes and rank, the campaign, town, city, and social structures. Before I go into like digging through all of this and flipping through here, I just want to, make a statement here. This book contains everything that you need from Gary Gygax's guidance to create a campaign. That's what he's really talking about in here, is that you're creating a campaign that will take the player characters from the start of their career, beginning in a small town or maybe a city or whatever, and he gives you all of the tools to create what that small town is, what's in that small town, what are the people that live there all about, what is the region, what is the resources that could be found there, what is the tone and the character of that small town. And now the players are there, and they've had that kind of development done by the players. The DMG then gives the DM the ability to have those characters learn of an adventure to go on. They're going to travel to that, let's say, a dungeon. So they're traveling to that dungeon. The weather is going to come into play. The terrain that they're traveling across is coming to play. Random encounters may take place along the way. They get to the dungeon. All of the features of the dungeon can be generated using the Dungeon Master's Guide, along with the monster manual and possibly even the player's handbook and such. So it's all laid out there in this book on how to piece all of that together. There was one thing in here that Gary Gygax was talking about as far as whose story is being told. The story starts off as a creation of the and the domain of the Dungeon Master. So his or her story is beginning to unfold for the players. The player characters are going to interact with that. They're going to influence it. And Gary's actual sentence that he put in here was that it creates a superior alloy when both the DM's vision for the adventure and the player characters, the player's alteration of that come together to create an overall story. So that question that comes up that I've seen oftentimes recently is, well, whose story is being told? the answer, I think Gary really captured best. Well, the campaign is the DM's. The player characters are going to manipulate that, influencing it with their portion of the story, and together it creates the overall story of the thing. So you can't separate the DM from the process. You can't separate the players from the process. But the DM starts first, the players then modify, and together it creates a story. So that's the true intention of a role playing game. I think that is really, coming straight from Gary Gygax, the creator of role playing games. In the fantasy setting, he's the one that kind of lays that groundwork out here in this volume, talking about it and saying that these are the concepts and the principles that I'm laying out here, not as a superior voice from on high, as he said, but just that they're here for you to use if you so choose to. And there are certain things, though, that cannot be taken out of it, that are integral to actually playing a role-playing game. So we will switch back over and possibly just try to wrap this up in this last segment. So he's talking about that progression of building and creating as you're going along, and the campaign. So he's talking about creating a campaign here, and everything from peasants to serfs to slaves in your campaign world. They do a sample dungeon here and lay this all out for the player who is about to embark on his or first venture into dungeon mastering. So give you a whole example of play, non-player character facts and traits. So things that can be for NPCs generated completely randomly if you so choose. So more of those 250 plus charts. Organizations and such, monsters and organizations, use of non-human troops. So it really does get into the minutia of world building, but this is giving you the tools that you might need if you're creating your own world, and it's intentional to give you this much detail. And again, you don't have to use it. If you're using the world of Greyhawk, which will be the next video I'm actually going to do, you don't have to use this whole section of the Dungeon Master's Guide because it's already done for you. Although you can make some alterations to it using this, but this is all for campaign building. So creating and building your own campaign. Once you get the hang of it, you might not have to go back to doing this again. Magical research and the process of doing that. You can see I'm still just barely halfway through this book. Let's take a look at page 120. So here is roughly page 120 here. Energy draining and such. Let's see if we get to random treasure tables. All right, so we're getting kind of close to the very end of this book because treasures are probably about 30 or more pages of just treasure items and such. Let's see. Yeah, random encounters then. Yeah, so treasures was um, probably about 30 or more pages long. This is actually still treasures, and we're at page 177. Actually, we're closer to 50, 60 pages of treasure. Then we get to random encounter monsters. Actually, maybe I will wrap this whole thing up today because these last sections are just random tables, 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 tables. Appendix C, random monsters still. Some more charts and graphs. And quite frankly, you'll probably use very little of this, um, these appendices for random encounters and such. You're just as a DM going to decide these are the things I'm going to put in my dungeon, and if I do have some random encounters, I'm just going to use this smaller, much smaller set. Appendix F is on gambling, so doing dice games if you wish. And oh, I will be remiss if I do not take a look at Appendix N. Inspirational educational reading. Here are the books that are the inspiration for Dungeons and Dragons. And so, if you are a long term player, or you intend to be a long term player of Dungeons and Dragons, Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, or any fantasy role playing game out there, you should be familiar with some of these authors, their works, and such. I'm not saying that you need to read them all or own them all or whatever, but at least some of them you should be involved with or have experience with reading some of these. And that is a very useful resource for you if you're new to role playing games in general and especially fantasy role playing games. I can't say that I've read every one of these, but I've read more than half to a certain extent. Creating a party. And let's see, we're almost done. There we are. We're done. So, so once again, I hope I hope that you enjoyed that. And I know it was kind of, rushing through certain portions of it as well. But like I said earlier on, if there is any segment of this book that you want me to go and spend a little bit extra time on after I'm done running the whole series, please leave a comment in there and say, hey, will you go back over the use of magic, or will you talk a little bit about the difference between artifacts and regular magic items, uh, and so on? Because I literally could have spent another hour and a half just going into much more detail into this book. Um, but I wanted to focus mostly on what was the intent of this. How does this book make Advanced Dungeons and Dragons more playable, and why now with the combination of the monster manual, the player's handbook, and this, which creates the same core three books that are in all editions of Dungeons and Dragons, with just these three books, you have all of the tools that you need in order to create and run, long campaigns, short campaigns, to create one-shot adventures, or to create mega dungeons where there'll be multiple adventures within the same dungeon space. How to create towns from the ground up, fill it with NPCs with interesting backstories involved, or to, have a desert wasteland that the players are, trying to escape from. And so very little interaction with the outside world. And their major challenge is going to be the terrain and the weather effects that they're facing. And that is all here in this book. So really, it's a phenomenal resource to have. If you don't have first edition advanced Dungeons and Dragons books, let's say you're, hey, I've only played 5e, this is the game that I love and such, I really do recommend that you go back and you look at these earlier editions and see, there wouldn't be a 5e if there wasn't a 1e. I mean, it's kind of an obvious thing to say, but you'll see where the inspiration comes from. If 5e has an Appendix N in it, Appendix N in it, like this does, this should be listed in that. So I recommend that you take a look at this, whether it's in PDF or you get your hands on on an old edition, hardcover copy like I did here. They are starting to get a lot more expensive now because I think the demand is high for these older edition books, and and that also answers the question: why is it still so playable? Because it is very popular, and I think the popularity for first edition and the editions prior to fifth edition are gaining in popularity. As time goes on, people just looking to see, well, what was the earlier stepping stones of Dungeons and Dragons, and taking a look at that. So, again, thanks for joining. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed, please consider subscribing. And I look forward to seeing you on a gaming screen sometime soon. You'll have a great afternoon, and take care.